Today, we're very excited to have on our first panel speaking about how to maximize the value of batteries. Yesterday we were just having a great discussion about this topic, so I'm very excited to join this, really engaging panel. We have Lewis, client partner and strategic development of Circulor, Inza, environmental department manager of Northvolt, Tillman, associate lead, sustainable industrial and mobility strategy of SYSTEMIQ, Jen, director governmental affairs EU Benelux of UMICORE, and Sandra, circularity lead of Polestar. Let's all have them up on stage.
Yeah, if they're all ready, let's bring them up, please. Perfect. While we do this, we can also kind of give it a short, quick, if it takes 1 more minute, we can also wait. But yeah, I see some people coming up.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, all.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are.
Amazing. Thanks so much, everyone. And maybe just one thing, I think if you're not speaking, feel free to also mute yourself just in case. We can do that. I think we're waiting for one more speaker and we're all there, but I think she will be with us very shortly. And otherwise, in case there's any technical difficulty, we can already start and then bring her up right when she's available. Brilliant. So I think we can just gonna have one more speaker coming up. And oh, actually, I just got the news. We got 450 people now on here. So that's I think quite a also for us quite a breakthrough from over 40 countries. And yeah, so I think we're just getting everyone. I think the last speaker just ready to join us. In the meantime, if you maybe already want to put some of your questions on this topic, maybe I saw some already talking about the battery passport. And maybe you can put in the chat if you ever heard about the battery passport. So this can also help our speakers and our panelists to know what is kind of the level of knowledge on this topic. Or anything else you would like to kind of address us a bit more, please put it in the chats. We have a really close look on all the comments, so please don't hesitate to write in there, and we really love to hear from you.
Yeah, I just want to echo Simon's comment on that as well. So we have this kind of issue on battery revolution where we have a lot of questions towards the end of the session. So we would really love for you to put in your comments and questions as soon as possible, so we can keep track of that and ask them at appropriate time. And as we speak, great, Lewis, thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks so much, everyone, for being here. So maybe let's kind of kick up this topic because I think it's a very important one. We see it's a big panel. I think there's a lot of interest in this topic as well. So maybe we can just kick it off by kind of going a bit of one by one when we start. So we just said where you're coming from, what the organizations are. But now I think maybe if you can just maybe in 5 minutes or so, tell us a bit about why do you care about this topic? Why do you care about maximizing the value of batteries from an environmental as well as an economical background? And maybe also, what is your work in this space? We heard already battery passport earlier, some of these kind of different tools you're developing, maybe with your organization or with any of the partners as well. And I think, just looking at the value chain of a battery, I think it kind of makes sense if you start at the beginning, where the materials are coming from. And I think for this, it could be really nice, Luis, if you kind of want to kick us off, talking a bit about the raw materials, where the raw materials are coming from, what we have to do better there, and kick it off from there.
I think 5 minutes are not enough, but I try my best. Hi, everyone. My name is Louise Müller-Hofstede. I'm from Circulor, and yeah, very happy to join this excellent panel today. And what we do at Circulor, I think that needs a little bit of explanation. Basically, we are tracking raw materials from mine to manufacturer and back into the recycling to prove circularity and also to support and underpin sustainability claims. So at the moment, even though you might know a certified source where you are sourcing your raw materials from, doesn't necessarily mean that these maybe also more costly raw materials are actually the ones that then end up in your products, because there are too many steps in between refineries in Asia where potentially raw materials get mixed. And by providing this transparency, by establishing traceability in supply chains, we make sure that we follow the actual material as opposed to the transaction paper around it. So we don't follow the money, we follow the material. And only by following the material, you can make sure that sustainability claims, your sustainability claims, but also the ones of your suppliers are in fact the ones that are being claimed. And yeah, why do I care? It's a very good question. Of course, we have to look at the batteries or at raw materials when we are talking about an emission-free future, right? So on the one hand, we will be emission-free on the roads with the cars that will be produced from now on. But on the contrary, there will be much more emissions in the supply chain. So it's only a shift from emissions at that end, shifting them to the beginning again. And we need to care about that because otherwise we don't need to do the green energy transition. We don't need to do all those electric vehicles, right? Because otherwise we would just, we would do all of this effort, but don't see global warming being stopped at all. It's just that we don't see it with our own eyes on the streets anymore. Yeah, and as we are moving to green energy and to mobilization, there will be the demand for raw materials is much higher than producing a combustion engine car, and therefore the focus needs to be on sustainability and also, of course, ethical reasons and the very upstream part of the supply chain. And I think my biggest interest there is to see this linear value chain being bound to a circular value chain where downstream becomes upstream and recyclers suddenly become raw material producers. And it's an exciting time, and I'm looking forward to hear from my co-panelists.
Thank you so much, Louise, for sharing this with us. And I think if we now kind of go to the next step, and that's kind of going from, raw materials and now put them actually into batteries, into the devices. I think it would make a lot of sense to go to Insa Bergman next from Northvolt. And maybe you can share a bit about, what are the topics important for you as a battery producer in this regard?
Yeah, hi. I totally agree with Louise's description about why we do this and about global warming. As you all know, we want to produce the greenest battery in the world. Which means at the end, we are really interested in this battery passport because then we have a full transparency for the customer. And in the end, he can look in the information of the battery passport and can compare the different products which are on the market. And that's where we are really interested in. And yeah, that's why I'm here in this panel discussion, and I'm really looking forward to the development in this regulation and the battery passport. And yeah, looking forward and waiting to the outcome of the European Commission and Council. So happy to discuss this here.
Sorry, Catherine, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that, technical issues. Well, thanks, Insa, for that comment. Maybe we can move on to Sander next for the OEM perspective.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's Sander Yahilo from Polestar. We are a progressive new EV brand that broke away from Volvo a few years back. We have 2 models in our roster right now. So we're quite small compared to the competition out there, but we want to believe that we are the front runners when it comes to design, performance, and sustainability. So in our sustainability strategy, we do have focus on 4 key areas, which are transparency, as was mentioned here by Circulor. We have inclusion, which focuses on a lot of the social impacts that comes through mining and the impact that battery manufacturing has along its value chain. We also have climate neutrality as a moonshot goal in order to produce a carbon neutral car by 2030. And then circularity is a fourth key focus area, which obviously can be much broader than it encompasses all of these 4 areas into one. But in our circularity strategy, we are putting a lot of emphasis onto the batteries, because we know that they do have a high share of the carbon footprint of the car. So around a third of our footprint comes of the CO2 emissions come from the battery. And that's not the end of the story. There's the minerals that go into it, which are still finite resources. So even if we have a carbon neutral battery, that's not the end of the story, and that's not where we want to stop. We essentially want to make sure that we have more circular resources, like recycled content going into the batteries, or that we maximize the efficiency of the batteries. And last but not least, we want to make sure that the batteries have a proper either second life, or there's reuse potential in the cars for some components at least. And then, of course, recycling is a massive concern for us. And then we know that the demand for electric batteries is only going to be exponentially increasing, and the availability of recycled content for those batteries is not going to be able to keep up with the demand for the increasing production. So we have a lot of challenges in that area, but we're putting emphasis into each of those circular strategies to try to maximize resource efficiency. And I'm very proud that we're also working with some of the panelists here, like Circulor and Northvolt, in supporting them, and them supporting us in making our battery future more sustainable. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sander, for sharing that. And you can already see there's some cross-collaboration already happening on this panel, which is, of course, always really good. And I think also in this regard, maybe Tilman, would you like to go next? Maybe also, of course, we already had just said the keywords of second life, but also kind of how to, increase the impact, reduce emissions. So maybe you want to share your perspective on this with the work you're doing.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the panel and the invitation. So why do I care? Why does SYSTEMIQ care? That's clearly from the side of creating an impact and supporting the transition to zero carbon mobility, but also zero carbon engineering and value chains, as my previous speakers have really outlined so well, right? And so SYSTEMIQ, what we're doing, we're a change company. We were founded in direct direction to the Paris Agreement, and with our by now 300 colleagues globally, we're working with governments, corporates, researchers across the world to accelerate the transition to zero carbon and resource productive economic systems. And one of those topics clearly is battery electric mobility, right? Like, or rather, mobility being enabled into the low carbon era through electrification. And in that, of course, batteries are the core element. I mean, batteries are really what the engine was in the 20th century. They will be for the 21st century, right? And yeah, we touched on the critical issues that batteries bring with them nonetheless, where circular economy, where renewable energy use in their production, and of course also in the use phase of vehicles and stationary applications, is so critical to minimize the footprints and really make the most out of them, right? And increase or maximize the value that they can bring to society. And so our role as SYSTEMIQ, we see ourselves as analysts creating the insights, of creating the connections, of investing ourselves as well into innovative solutions and working with the pioneers in the field, such as my great panelists here, and the governmental sides as well, where we're, for example, very excited about the draft of the European Commission for the battery regulation that really supports this drive to more responsible battery production and an entire responsible battery value chain, including the battery passport, right? Like increasing digital availability of data and to maximize the value of batteries. And what we found in our analyses, for example, for the World Economic Forum, was that the circular economy could really drop like total lifetime costs of batteries, but also CO2 footprint and environmental impact so dramatically, like cost by almost 20%. Across, shared mobility, vehicle to grid, smart grid integration, reuse and second life applications of putting vehicle batteries into a second application in stationary storage, and of course including recycling as well, and meanwhile also reducing the carbon footprint substantially over lifetime. And I think that is the interesting bit, right? We're moving away from a pure like energy mobility dichotomy to an integrated system where vehicle batteries become an integral part of a renewable energy power system, and outlining this transition and supporting a few of those sensitive interventions, such as the battery passport, supporting vehicle to grid, supporting the right regulations and circularity. That's the role of SYSTEMIQ, and so I'm really excited to join the panel today.
Thanks so much for that, Tilman. And last but not least, we would love to have Jen to help us tidy up all these thoughts and various different topics that we have talked about. We'd love to hear from UMICORE's side, and also with regards to recycler and cathode active material producers. What is your take on the topic?
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, it's difficult to position UMICORE in the battery value chain because we are at the very beginning and at the very end of the value chain. So I understand that I was put here as the last speaker from the perspective of recycling, but I can assure you that we have about 100 times more people working in cathode active material production than in recycling. And the reason is indeed quite easy to understand. Today, there's not that much to recycle. So what we recycle today is what has been put on the market, let's say 10 years ago, and that was not that much yet. So for us as a cathode material producer, we start mainly with primary products, just because there's not enough recyclables today to fill the value chain and to build up a stock of materials in batteries in Europe and worldwide. And sustainability for us starts indeed already at acquiring raw material, primary raw material, and so due diligence and responsible sourcing. It's a very important part of our business. It's already more than 20 years that we have this on our agenda. We were the first to get the certificate for responsible cobalt sourcing. But next to that, we also have our own initiatives on lithium, on manganese, on nickel, so to ensure that at least at the source already, it starts with responsible sourcing. And it's not only on human rights, it's also about the environmental impact. It's also about governance. And so we are happy to see that in the proposal for the battery regulation, that there is a lot of attention to this kind of values that we support more than 100%. Then the next step in cathode material production, it's the transformation. So after refining and transformation. So after the production of the minerals, you have to refine them and you have to transform them in battery materials. And that's in fact mainly an energy intensive process. So you need a lot of energy to convert, let's say, the cobalt, nickel, lithium atoms into an active material. And that's electricity. And we have committed that our first plant in Europe that will start operational before the end of the year, that it will run on 100% renewables. That's a commitment. All our new plants will, from day one, start as 100% renewable energy. So because this is the most important sustainability aspect. And then comes the use phase, where we don't have a huge impact, except of course on the quality of the materials, so that the lifetime will be longer and the safety issues, etc. But that's mainly managed in fact by the car OEMs. And then at the end of life, we come back when the batteries, after maybe a second life, after the use phase, we take back the batteries to recycle them and to convert them back into cathode materials. And there the footprint or the sustainability impact is, of course, resource efficiency. What can we do more with recycling than we do today? So more collection, more efficient recycling, and reducing also the footprint, the CO2 footprint during the operations. And to manage this, or to keep control of all the steps, we believe indeed that battery passport, and we can talk about how to implement it, but that's an important element in the sense that it should contain some static elements like how the batteries have been produced, what is the CO2 footprint of the battery produced, etc. But also dynamic data that gives information on how the battery has been used, what is the potential for the second life, and also information for the recyclers, how to recycle the battery in the best way, and when, so after a second life or not. So that's dynamic information that should be included also in the battery passport. So the battery passport is a tool. It's a way to be transparent in the CO2 footprint, but also the response to sourcing, the capacity for second life. So that's the value of a passport. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jan, for kind of also teasing up for kind of what would be my next question, which is exactly related to the battery passport, because I think as we just heard, right, there's many stakeholders who are relevant to make this all happen, you know, and we have to all work together. But also one thing is we have to make sure that there's enough transparency to we can actually ensure that the things which are announced actually also done, you know, and also all the, you know, we have now all this drive that we want to improve it, but if you have no data to prove it, it's very tough to actually make it happen. So I think what now, maybe from this kind of data angle as well, maybe we can go around the room and ask a bit about like, what's the data you need? Like, what's the insights you need to make the system happening? And maybe also what's your angle? Like, you know, what's kind of would help you to be more efficient in your work as well? And maybe you can start, I know it's all a bit mixed up from the beginning and the end, it's all very interconnected, but I guess that's why we also need this battery passport. But I'm wondering maybe if someone wants to share something, maybe like Luis, if you want to kick us off again. And then we can go, anybody who wants to share something on their battery passport vision and angle and requirement.
Yeah, sure. I think it's quite a good point you made, and it's actually the exact right question to ask. What kind of data do we need? Because it's not about arbitrarily and randomly collecting data, right? It's actually defining the objective first, know where you want to go, and then you understand sort of like data entry points from a software business point of view. Where do I need to collect data in order to make the objective happen, right? But we shouldn't just collect data and then see what we can do with the new information, because this is just like a useless exercise. So I'm not coming from the manufacturing side, I'm coming from the tech side, and I can only say that the battery passport needs technology and in order to enable circularity, right? There's a certain amount of circularity we can do today, but and this is then again relating to the title of this panel, how do I maximize the value out of batteries, is in order to maximize, you need information, right? You need knowledge about the batteries. And at the moment, there's very little knowledge about potentially end-of-life batteries, either second use, reuse, or recycling. So these decisions are currently not being made out of knowledge, but sort of like, and also because there's not yet a specific marketplace for end-of-life batteries. So basically it's like a surprise bag, you know, you don't really know if there's enough valuable raw material in the battery. Is it actually, could we have used it for 3 more years? It's very difficult to say it at this point. And the only statement I have is that we need technology in order to enable circularity, and this is why we exist and what we are doing. But obviously I need to hand over to my co-panelists to answer the question, like which information are you looking for, and I would extend the question to what's your objective in order to define those points.
Thanks so much, Luis. And I think maybe Jan, do you have another thought on this one as well?
Yeah, I think information sharing is important, but we also have to look at confidentiality of some information. And therefore, we think that battery passports, which could be, I imagine, a cloud solution, should give access to the information on a need-to-know basis. For instance, I can imagine that the car manufacturer do not want to share all the details about the battery chemistry and all the details about it, whereas for a recycler, that could be of importance. But then you should design the passport in such a way that a recognized recycler could get access to that information, but not the whole world. The same, for instance, for the supply chain. If we train and develop a new supplier to be compliant with all our standards, we want at least to profit from that, from training and information during a certain period of time. So we will not disclose immediately with whom we are working in the supply chain. But on the other hand, an auditor who wants to certify that we are compliant with all kind of due diligence rules, they have, of course, to get access to that kind of information. And so I think the design should be on a need-to-know basis.
If I can reflect on what Jan was saying as well, at Polestar we value transparency at a very high level, and it's our ambition to become the most transparent car company out there. And from a circularity or sustainability perspective, maybe the IP question is secondary from strictly the sustainability perspective, because we see that the data holds all the information that we need to help us make decisions. And there's no question about whether a battery passport should exist. There should be a passport for pretty much every car component and every material that we sell across all the industries. And with Circulor, we have started tracing cobalt throughout the value chain, and we're looking into expanding that into lithium, nickel, and mica as well, as these are also high-risk minerals. So the question is maybe indeed, and also we're looking into carbon tracking using the same kind of blockchain technology and traceability. So the question maybe comes down to how do we agree on the methodologies to measure and capture that data, and how do we ensure that it's that we all understand the data the same way, because we know that LCAs are a tool that are widely used, but they can be easily misused if certain system boundaries or cutoff criteria are changed. So I think it's more important that we have a globally agreed, well, a globally is ambitious maybe, but to have an agreed upon standard on how we measure the data, and that to make that methodology fully transparent as well.
Yeah, I totally agree to Sander. That's what I also wanted to say. We have a lot of initiatives now, like Global Battery Alliance, European Battery Alliance. Some countries are working on their own passport. And there we have to have clear calculation rules and the methodologies for the LCA, so that we, as I said in the beginning, we have a situation where we have a transparency over the whole information for the customer. I mean, if we have 10 different battery passports, then it's difficult to compare.
And Inza, if I can jump in, I fully agree, right? Like if we have a proliferation of many different approaches, there will just be so much data that it will be very difficult to use, and it wouldn't really improve on the situation that we have right now, right? Where life cycle analyses exist and are broadly used, but of course are mostly incomparable because of the varying assumptions. So consolidating that, I think, is key, right? And making sure that the passports work in one integrated system. And I think to Jan's point earlier, I think that's where the EU push for the battery regulation is so critical, because the battery passport that the EU will be mandating starting 2026, which is really right around the corner if you think of it, right? In terms of the development cycles of the OEMs, this kind of battery passport, if it's mandated across the EU, will be a really great push to create this kind of consolidation, and then help create the transparency and the data requirements that we talked about. And I know that there was one comment in the comment section or question about the value of second life, because I find that quite interesting, because it's a bit of a polarizing topic, putting batteries into second life applications. Will it happen? Will it not happen? And I think that's a challenging question to answer, right? Given the long lifetime of batteries, and at the same time this rapid innovation path that we have. And I think right here, digital tools like the battery passport, especially if they're used consistently and the information becomes usable in a transparent way for all the market actors, is such a great enabler, right? Because it will allow, once the information as required by the EU on dynamic data of the battery health becomes available to the right actors in the market, that really will enable that assessment of batteries at the point where you take that decision whether Second Life makes sense or no. And so that could really lift up that potential of Second Life, which the recent PhD that I received from one of the OEMs, from within one of the OEMs, that could be a CO2 and monetary benefit of up to 20% just by extending that life through Second Life application, and 20% on this large chunk of carbon, large chunk of monetary value. That's a big statement, right? So unlocking that value through battery passports, I think, will be super exciting once that gets into the market in a consolidated and consistent fashion. So it's very exciting right now.
Fantastic. I think, yeah, Jan, I think you mentioned you would also be interested to answer some of the questions in our comments.
Yeah, there was a question on shouldn't we go for fewer cars in the streets? And maybe my answer will, as a materials producer, you will maybe surprised by my answer, but I fully agree. If we look at the use intensity of cars, that's about 5%. So 5% of the time the cars are driving, and 95% of the time the cars are idle in the street or in garage and not used. So if you would run a business on that way, that you say, I have all my operators have equipment that they only use 5% of the time, you would say, well, couldn't you share your equipment? So the same with cars. I think if we can drive the same mileage with only half of the cars, then we just go from 5% use to 10%. We could do the same mileages with just half of the material. And then, of course, we need a circular economy, and the material will rotate faster, but that's only good. Of course, you will say then the mileage will not reduce, but even then, if the mileage reduces because we share cars, we drive with 3 or 4 people in a car instead of just one, we support that. Because if we do not use the cobalt and the lithium and the nickel for batteries, we will find other applications. As material producers, we are inventive. And at the end of the goal, if we can simply do and run our society with less material, we have to do that. That's the same as with money. If you can run a business with fewer money or less money, you have to do that. That's easy as that.
Sander, did you have a point? I saw you.
Yeah, I was thinking about what Jan was saying about increasing the utility of car batteries. Indeed, that we are at risk. I see some of the comments in the chat as well that do we really need that many cars? And it's a problem. That we will just not have enough resources to increase production or have even the same production as we have now. And there's an additional caveat for electric batteries, which doesn't stand for ICE cars, is that the batteries also have aging in time, not just aging through cycling. So in a way, it's even more important that we increase the utility, because if a standing electric car will actually, the battery will degrade over time, whereas a internal combustion engine car would still work the same 10 years after, but an electric car might already be spent just by sitting for 10 years time. And if the utility rate is so low as it is today, the only way to make efficient use is to increase utility of the car. So we're also looking into those kind of business models of how to increase passenger count in the car to enable car sharing, or incorporate some other mobility as a service solutions. We know that the current existing models are not good enough for us, and we know that there is a working business model in the future, but we just have to accept that it doesn't exist yet now, but we have to keep working on it to identify what is the business model that enables to make a profit at the same time as also increase the utility and material efficiency.
And if I can jump in here, and I really approve of everything Sander said, except for one point. I don't think it's the only way to increase utility through sharing the car. I pointed to vehicle to grid, to smart charging, to smart integration of the battery as asset in the power grids in the beginning. And I think that creates an exciting opportunity as well. And by the way, also for car producers. Or OEMs and operators of mobility as a service, for example, as if the battery isn't utilized to the fullest for driving, then it may well be used to balance power grids, for example, or even as a power storage, shorter term power storage as well. And of course, there's some concerns about degrading the battery, right? Again, also Sander, a great point that you bring, right? Like, which is a huge issue with second life. Over time, batteries will degrade, have a higher internal resistance, lower efficiency, lower capacity, and so it's indeed a question like, how will you degrade the battery or will you not, right? And there I find it extremely exciting what the latest developments show by the market entry of high performance LFP batteries, by the announcement that Simon made earlier on CATL with the sodium ion batteries that last a long time, like the 3 million kilometer batteries that last so long that really we won't be using it up in one vehicle. And at that point, which will all come into the market in the next coming years, this really will become a great opportunity to use also these batteries for higher value in the power grids, helping decarbonize those as well. And the Global Battery Alliance analysis of late last year showed or estimated a cumulative carbon abatement by 2030 of 2 gigatons per year by supporting more renewables in the power grids globally. So that's 2 gigatons. That's a lot of carbon abatement through smart integration of batteries. So I think it's an exciting way of using them more productively.
Yeah. I fully agree, Tilman, with your comment on using the batteries more intensively, even for other applications. But then it becomes, for individual users, so complicated that it's hard to expect that individuals can optimize their use. So that's why I think that sharing of leasing concepts where the car OEM or someone else owns on a professional level the battery and can manage it in an optimized way, it is the way forward.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you all for sharing this. And I think there's one question I thought also quite interesting, talking a bit about the policy and the key regulations which are needed to make recycling, second use a priority. Like, how do we enable this? And maybe what are some of the frameworks which will be needed to make it happen? I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on this. Jan, I feel you might, and maybe some others.
Yeah, I think this regulation is an important element in developing towards a real circular economy. If there would be no rules and targets on recycling, we would not be yet where we are today. So in the new regulation, we see some good elements. For instance, the material recovery rates. So the Commission says it's not only important that you have a lot of weight recycled, but also what did you recycle? And so it's a huge difference if you say I have recycled cobalt or lithium or nickel, or I have recycled oxygen. And so recycling of oxygen, everyone knows that it doesn't contribute to any circular economy objective. But today in the targets, in a weight-based target, you are incentivized to recycle oxygen and using energy and using chemicals to recover oxygen because it contributes a lot to the weight target. And so the shift, or at least a complement into what did you recycle and how much of those critical elements did you recycle, we think it's a way forward. Then also a new element in the proposal is what's called a recycled content. So the batteries will have to contain a certain amount of recycled content of cobalt, lithium, and nickel. We think that the Commission did a good job by selecting those three, because suppose that you would say there's also a target on copper or aluminum. Well, there's so much copper and aluminum that is already recycled, and the batteries only use a small fraction of it, that it would be easy, even 100% recycled content target for copper or of aluminum would be within reach. You would simply reduce the recycled content in aluminum frames, for instance. But cobalt, lithium, and nickel, and especially class 1 nickel, is used mainly in batteries. And so if you can keep those three elements within the battery value chain, you avoid that there would be a degradation, a kind of a downcycling of those three elements. And so I think it's an interesting idea that this recycled content is included now in the proposal.
Yeah, but I also think on this point, it's the same. It's a little bit also exchanging one problem with the other, right? So by saying we're going to use secondary material and it's being incentivized by a legal framework or regulation, for example, you have the same challenge as you would have with primary material in terms of making sure that the claims about primarily being ethically sourced or secondary in fact being recycled is the same question. So again, coming from traceability and also looking a little bit beyond circular economy and what will wait for us once we achieve this, there's also a very dark side of that waiting for us, and challenges I think we have to take into consideration now, because otherwise we'll have that regulation, have that circularity, and then have a lot of problems in terms of double counting. You know, more certified cobalt is being sold than being produced. Obviously, how do you want to make the differentiation if cobalt is in fact recycled or primary? Because it is the same performance, same quality, same color. You know, it's not actually green, because and therefore you have to back the claims up with a history, a passport, whatever that is, and this is also where the regulation and the passport as part of the regulation is going to say the time is over to make claims. You know, we are in a technology point of view, we are there. We have the technology. Luckily, Polestar is showing us it works. Commitment to transparency is okay. It doesn't mean you are completely visible to everybody. So yeah, making sure that in fact recycled material is recycled, and not saying per se recycled is great, because it is not.
There's also a bit of a conundrum that we're facing with recycling batteries, which is that if we put in a lot of expensive minerals into the batteries, they become more feasible for recycling, like cobalt. But if we put in less valuable minerals in there, they lose any feasibility for recycling, and we end up with a lot of waste. And at the same time, the amount of mining is roughly in the same ballpark. So we're kind of not really. The current system does not really optimize and take into account the social impacts. There's no externalities are not taxed to the extent that they perhaps should be, and it's causing an issue if you have to determine, should we use an LFP battery or an NCM battery in terms of thinking about the end of life. Then the kind of NCM battery, cobalt containing battery, actually seems more circular because it's more likely that it will get recycled, whereas the LFP currently is not so recyclable, and that's a huge issue that, like, I think regulation could help make more sustainable choices.
But that's exactly the reason.
No, Jan, go ahead on the recycling part.
Yeah, just a short comment. What you said is indeed the reason why the Commission maintained also the overall recycling efficiency target. So even an LFP battery will have to be recycled to a certain extent. Even if they do not specify, you have to recycle phosphorus or iron.
Yeah, exactly. So actually, the very point that I wanted to make there, and to the question, what are the key regulations that we need to look out for? Definitely the battery regulation by the EU, which is seminal if it gets passed as expected, and which will, I think this trade-off between value and criticality in, value and criticality and circularity out. I think that really shows how regulation is, critical. It just doesn't happen without regulation at all, and so that's really important. Regarding overall sustainability of the transport sector at large, we did a thorough analysis recently with the Circular Cars Initiative in a report that got forward by Transport Commissioner Valian. On EU policy for automotive circularity. So anybody who is interested in that can maybe read up on that through these. It is quite a comprehensive view, and because there is a huge range of things that the EU is already planning, and that now with the Biden administration coming in strong on sustainability as well, will come from the US as well. So I think we can expect quite a few policy pushes to support the sustainability there. And on the other hand, technological innovation, as it comes in, if it actually happens that the CATL plans on scaling sodium batteries fast come to fruition, and they are able to scale them quickly, then indeed there will be quite disruptive on the current expectations on all of the minerals and circularity questions that we're currently discussing right now, no? Like on cobalt, on nickel, on lithium. If sodium batteries become competitive and performing right and are scalable, that will, in 2 years' time, we'll have an entirely different discussion. So it's an incredibly exciting time to see where the path is actually going.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that, I think that's also a good point, because me being a client partner, speaking with customers and potential customers, there's exactly two camps, right? The one camp is the ones who want to do it because it's just the right thing, Polestar, for example, and then they are the ones that need to do it. So the customers I'm speaking most with about the EU battery regulations sit actually in Asia, because so it has impact as supply chains are global. This EU battery regulation has a much bigger effect on the global impact than we would think. It's they need to comply with those regulations, and that's why the regulation is so immensely important. And yeah, and I think also, and I mean, maybe you can also share again, Insa, from your point of view. I think the more concrete the regulation is and the more precise it is, the better it is for manufacturers to actually comply, because they all say we want to comply, but still there's still like details needed in order to make that happen, right?
Exactly. I can refer to the point of Jan and Sander from the recycling content. I mean, it's great to have the numbers of the recycling content in it, but it's not mentioned to which material or to which recycling step it refers. So it makes it different if I go over the whole recycling process from the material which I got in, or if I just look on the main recycling step, like the hydromet or the pyromet. So this has to be added, as soon as possible, I think, in the delegated act.
Well, we have to look at the details of the calculation, that's clear. But it has been said in a previous round of discussions as well. I think there's one thing that we agree, that is that rules, how to calculate, how we report, are very important, because people will compare. People will compare what's your footprint, what is your recycled content, etc. So it will be essential to have standardized rules of calculation. But I would like to come back on the remark that Louise made about the extra European production of batteries. Some people think that the battery regulation is there to protect European production. But that's wrong, I think, because if you look at, for instance, the CO2 footprint reporting or the recycled content requirements, Asian producers can cope with that easier than Europeans. Why? Because they don't have the domestic requirements on it. So if they have a battery production with a low CO2 footprint, they can allocate that to export to Europe. They have much more access to recyclables, so to end-of-life batteries, and they don't have a domestic market that asks for recycled content. So it will be easier for them to allocate all that recycled cobalt and lithium to batteries for export to Europe. So these requirements that Europe set in the regulation is not a way to protect the European industry. And that's not what we ask, by the way. We do not ask to be protected, but I just want to make clear that for others, it might be easier to get there.
Thank you very much, everyone, for sharing this. And maybe also this is kind of a good time to also kind of have another look at some of the questions we have received in the meantime, because we have about 12 minutes left. And as Catherine mentioned earlier, based on the 36 session we've been running over the last 36 weeks, the end always tends to be the most busy one. So Catherine, would you maybe raise one of the questions or two we have received?
Perfect. So on the first question we have was with regards to resources as well. So the question states, the world manufactures around 80 million vehicles per year with an average of 60 kilowatt per battery pack. Will it actually be possible to make enough batteries to meet the theoretical 100% EV ambition? Does anyone want to kickstart on that?
Yeah.
I think to an extent that was answered by Jan before, right? Like it depends on some of the materials. Most of the materials, cobalt, will like already in broad supply across the world as is. For others, nickel, lithium, there will be an expansion to the current mining. But geologically, there's no question about it. There's plenty of material around that's like very well established.
And as I said as well, we will have to move to a more sharing economy, and to make more intensive use of the materials that are already in the economy. So we can do it with half of the kilograms that we think we need.
Yeah, and also CO2 is not mentioned in this question, but essentially if we want to align with the Paris Climate Agreement, we also have to make that production climate neutral. And then clearly we see that we don't have enough renewable energy right now to make all industries carbon neutral. So there's another clear incentive why we just need to cut down on production and increase the sharing economy.
Very good points. I think that's really good. And I think another question we had was then also kind of connected to it. Are there any existing or in making common standards or methodologies for tracing materials also as on the recycling side? Is anybody would like to jump in? Luis, Jan, maybe?
Well, I think we discussed this already with the battery passports or whatever tool. It's possible. So the technology does exist. It has to be developed. But I know that there is, if I may compare with the conflict minerals legislation. And so their due diligence obligations are not required for recycled gold and conflict minerals. But you have to prove that it is recycled. If someone offers you an ingot of metal and they say, oh, it's recycled, yeah, how sure are you that it has been recycled? And then maybe Luis can give a better answer than I can do.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I also spoke about it already. I think the time it's not only starting to, and then I always like to refer back to the title of the panel, how to maximize the value out of a battery, and we talked about this beforehand when we had a little preparation. And what I like so much about this title is that it's on the one hand the value, so the monetary value, but also the environmental value, like how to really get the most out of it, right? And again, with the recycling point, it's we are at a time where we have the possibility to not only sell your product anymore, but actually to reach the Champions League and retain value from something you already have. But in order to use that value, you need some sort of like certificate that proves this is in fact recycled. And at the moment, this is, I mean, it's not being used enough, and I hope this regulation also steps in at this point. But also a good point to actually mention the conflict mineral regulation, because on my end, I have to say the listed minerals in this regulation, they're definitely not enough.
Yeah, thanks for that, Luis and Jen. On that note, also on maximizing battery value, we've got two questions, and I think a lot of interest in Second Life always. So one of the questions is how much more value can be re-extracted through a Second Life application? And there's a lot of value to be found. What is the most exciting developments in the Second Life space? Another one is also with regards to Second Life for stationary storage application. We see a lot of Second Life being used for that as well, but how much are they more limited compared to new cells, and will they reach, because they'll reach end of life a lot earlier? So will that be a problem to adapt for big companies who offers long durability or lifetime of these products? And would it be a problem to add Second Life batteries to the market, especially for stationary storage applications?
Mm-hmm. If I may make a few remarks on here, I'm currently on a conference in Geneva on battery recycling, and Second Life is also an important topic here. So what I heard in the last couple of hours today is in the fact that a lot of people are working on Second Life. And the idea, if a battery still has a functional value, you have to use it. That's in the circular economy idea, that's a good thing. But two remarks were made. In fact, it is that the potential markets for this secondary use or second life use is rather limited. And so if all the batteries from cars would be fit for a second life, then there are too many of them. And so only the best will go to a second life application, and because there is no need for more. That's one. And second is that the price of new batteries is going down and down and down. And certain moment it will be limited, of course, but the cost of refurbishing an old battery to be reused goes not down in the same way. So at a certain moment, it will become cheaper to produce a new battery than to refurbish an old battery. And then, of course, the business model is different. And then a third element, and that's the regulation. In fact, there is an ongoing, the battery refurbishers today, they do not fully realize their end-of-life responsibilities at the end of the second life. They think that they just can return it back to the first producer. And in the proposals of the Commission, that is not the case. So they will have to take extended producer responsibility, and that could also have an impact on the business model. So there's a few remarks that I heard this morning.
I think I fully second what Jan is saying. When we worked on our Circular Economy Initiative Germany last year, we worked intensely with the battery specialists and the automotive industries and modeled the potentials of second life batteries for the European market. And we found that based also quite corroborated with interviews and various specialists, a similar picture as Jan pointed out, right, that only a smaller share of the vehicle batteries would ever be useful for second life applications. Nonetheless, it's still quite a large amount of batteries. You'll have to basically adjust down their value at the point where you're using them to that residual capacity that they have left, and account, of course, for inefficiencies due to increasing resistance as batteries develop over time, as Sander pointed out earlier. So overall, it's not so easy to assess how much value is remaining, whether they work or not. So it's an analytical problem, which is bit by bit. We found somewhere between 10 and 30% maybe of all vehicle batteries might qualify for second life applications, and then it leads us to question what are the most interesting applications there, and that will depend on the value that's left in the battery, because as many applications like home storage, for example, in a basement, is probably too much effort for certifying them new as safe, refurbishing them into smaller packages, a lot of labor intensive work, so that would probably be not cost competitive. On the other hand, using them in a very large scale application, for example, like utilities would do in large scale renewables projects where they need a lot of storage, might be a good intermediate solution with very little transaction costs. And so those might be the kind of business cases that we will see scale over time. But indeed, it's not entirely clear how the economics will develop as battery innovation proceeds so rapidly. And so I think these 10-20% of potential value that I pointed out in the beginning from the latest research, and those limits that Jan pointed out from the current conference will give a good frame to how big the potentials will be overall. But the most important bit really is to start from the beginning now.
Yeah, just to add on this, what Tilman said very correctly, that there's a lot we don't know about the batteries of 10 years from now, even the ones that we're putting on the market now. We don't for sure know how they will perform at the end of the life and when that will happen. So what we can do right now is to mitigate any locked in technologies or approaches. Like we should be designing for circular batteries in the sense that they are easily disassemblable and that they are easily refurbishable. So we're putting those requirements on our suppliers as well to think about that when they're providing us the batteries, that this is what we care about, even though we don't know exactly what the business model will be and will there be a second life for all those batteries. We have to make sure that if something in the future, a business model does become feasible, or there's another use for the batteries, let's say the modules are taken out and put into smaller appliances or micro mobility devices. Like, we don't know, but we have to make sure that whatever we want to do with those batteries in the future, it would be as easy as possible to do. So through circular design, that's our approach.
Thanks so much, everyone. And I mean, unfortunately, we're kind of hitting time as usual. So I think maybe just before we close it up, because now we have a networking break coming in 1 minute. So maybe we can just do a quick round across the room, because we always love to look into what might happen for next or by next battery day in a year's time. So maybe if you can just share one quick thought or something you would wish for to happen in the coming year till next battery day 2022. So maybe Louise, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think I want to see, lots of those discussions, just like you, publicly, professionally, in more intimate rounds. I really would like to see more projects, more commitment, more actions coming to the surface. At the moment, there's a lot of words and a lot of theory and a lot of discussion, but we are yet already at a point where technology is there, where there is will, and where there's need. So this is what I would like to see for the next year: more real actions and projects coming to the surface.
Thanks, Louise. Jan, and 10 seconds.
Yeah, just I'm looking at it from the regulatory framework perspective. And so what I would wish is clarity on all the rules that come to us. So a quick vote of the Commission proposal and clarity on the calculation methods, so that we know what to do.
Insa, thank you.
Agree, and I wish good communication and good alignment.
Loving this. Sander.
I hope that industry will start looking at the problems we're facing as a more holistic problem, not only a problem for each company individually, but resources are finite for all of the world. So it doesn't just help if we solve issues for one company, but we need to think about the whole ecosystem around there.
Thank you, Tillman.
Agreed on all before, plus seeing the regulation pass to allow vehicle batteries to be integrated in power grids more efficiently, and the start of work on the battery passport.
Thank you so much. About 500 people from over 40 countries heard that. So thank you all so much for sharing this. And with this, we're going to close our first panel, but we're going to have another one coming. So again, big thank you for all of our panelists. And yeah, big thanks again to all our sponsors who make today's event happening. You have seen some of them already. You hear from some later on as well. And yeah, so now we have a really quick break, 10 minutes. Before we have our second panel starting in 10 minutes. So please check out the networking function. It's very interactive. It's a great way to get to know each other. And see you all again in 10 minutes. See you then. Bye-bye.
Okay. See you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you all.